Social media, a place where people showcase their best moments, their vacations, designer clothes, luxury cars, and seemingly perfect relationships. But what happens when that picture-perfect life is nothing more than an illusion? When the curated facade hides something far more sinister? Today, we're diving into the shocking case of Andre Zachary Rebello, a well-known influencer from Perth, Australia, whose life looked like a dream on Instagram. He was young, wealthy, at least that's what his followers believed. But behind the glamorous post was a man drowning in debt, desperate to keep up appearances. And in his desperation, he orchestrated an unthinkable crime. This is a story of deception, fraud, and murder. A chilling reminder that what we see online is often far from the truth. I'm Don, and you're listening to True Crime Revealed, where we uncover the dark realities behind true crime cases that shock the world. Let's begin. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we first need to look at the key players in this story, those whose lives would be forever changed by the deception, financial struggles, and ultimately, an unthinkable crime. Born in 1996, Andre Rebello seemed to have it all: youth, good looks, and a lifestyle that many envied. At just 19, he met the woman who would change his life forever, Gracie Piscopo. She wasn't just another beautiful face on social media. She was ambitious, determined, and rising fast in the influencer world. Andre was captivated. But Andre wasn't just in awe of Gracie. He saw an opportunity. He dropped out of university to become her manager, handling brand deals and finances. At first, this decision seemed like a smart move, but his earnings were modest, only about $20,000 a year. Compared to Gracie's skyrocketing success, it was pocket change. Still, Andre wasn't content with living in Gracie's shadow. He wanted to carve out his own financial empire. He turned to cryptocurrency, believing it would be his ticket to wealth and status. He assured Gracie that his investments would pay off in time. But behind closed doors, things weren't as promising as he made them seem. Gracie Piscopo's rise to fame was fast and lucrative. She had once worked as a gym receptionist, but when she began posting photos online, her life changed overnight. With millions of followers and brand sponsorships pouring in, she quickly became one of Australia's most recognizable influencers. By the time she and Andre had a child together, she was earning around $170,000 a year, more than enough to fund a life of luxury. Their social media was filled with glamorous vacations, expensive shopping sprees, and high-end cars. Together, they painted the picture of a perfect, thriving couple. But what their followers didn't know was that their luxurious lifestyle wasn't exactly what it seemed. At the heart of this story is Colleen Rebello, Andre's mother. A devoted single mother of four, she had raised her children after her marriage ended in 2010. She worked tirelessly as a teacher, ensuring her family had a stable life. But as her children grew older, she decided to follow her own dreams. At 58, she returned to school to start a new career in healthcare. Despite her love for her son, Colleen had concerns about Andre's choices. She wasn't convinced that social media fame was a long-term career. She worried about his decision to drop out of university, his reliance on Gracie's success, and his risky cryptocurrency investments. She wanted stability for her son, but Andre had other plans. Then, on May 25, 2020, Colleen Rebello was found dead in her home under mysterious circumstances. What first seemed like an unexpected tragedy would soon unravel into something far more sinister. Coming up next, we'll dive into the events leading up to Colleen's shocking death and how Andre's carefully curated online life was beginning to crumble beneath him. They say social media is a highlight reel, a place where people share the best parts of their lives. But what happens when that highlight reel is built on lies? When every post, every luxury is just an illusion? For Andre Rebello and Gracie Piscopo, their Instagram perfect life was a carefully curated facade, and behind that facade, a ticking time bomb. From the outside, they were living the dream, a glamorous couple, traveling the world, staying in five-star resorts, driving luxury cars, and wearing designer labels. But behind closed doors, it was a very different story. The truth was, Andre and Gracie were drowning in debt. They owed $120,000 and the number was growing. They were behind on their rent, struggling to make car payments, and barely keeping their heads above water. While Gracie was the face of their success, Andre was the one managing their finances, and he was hiding just how bad things had become. For years, Andre had reassured Gracie that their financial future was secure. His cryptocurrency investments would soon pay off, and they'd be wealthier than ever. But the reality? Those investments had completely failed. After 3 years, the man who called himself a crypto expert had made exactly $22 in profit. He was losing control. Debt collectors were calling, bills were piling up, and still they continued living a lifestyle they couldn't afford. Andre refused to let the illusion crack. He knew that if Gracie discovered the truth, everything would fall apart. And then Andre made a decision, a terrifying, calculated decision. Coming up next, we'll dive into the tragic final hours of Colleen Rebelo, what really happened on May 25th, 2020, and the shocking details that made investigators question if her death was truly an accident or something much more sinister. May 25th, 2020. It started like any other morning in the Rebelo household. Colleen, a devoted mother, went about her day as usual, speaking to her children, making plans. There was no sign that anything was wrong, no warning, no indication that this would be the last day of her life. Her youngest son, Fabian, had work that day. As always, his mother had promised to pick him up at 2 p.m. She was never late. She was never unreachable. But that afternoon, she didn't show up. At first, Fabian thought there must be a simple explanation. Maybe she got caught up with something. Maybe she lost track of time. But as the minutes passed, his concern grew. He called her. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. He called 13 times. Silence. Something wasn't right. Feeling uneasy, Fabian walked home, his mind racing. It wasn't a long walk, just 10 to 15 minutes. But with each step, his worry grew. When he reached the house, everything was quiet. Too quiet. He stepped inside, calling out for his mother. No response. And then he heard something. The shower was running. Maybe she just didn't hear him. Maybe everything was fine, but deep down, Fabian had a terrible feeling. He called her name again. Still nothing. The water kept running, but there was no movement, no sound beyond the steady stream of the shower. Something was wrong. His stomach tightened as he approached the bathroom door. His hands trembled as he reached for the handle. He hesitated. What if she was just taking a shower? What if he was overreacting? But he couldn't ignore the feeling in his gut. He pushed the door open, and what he saw inside would haunt him forever. There, under the running water, was his mother, kneeling on the floor, leaning lifelessly against the shower wall. Her body was still. Her skin felt cold, and her face had turned a strange bluish gray. For a split second, his mind refused to accept what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. This wasn't happening. But then instinct kicked in. In a panic, he pulled her out of the shower, laying her in the middle of the bathroom floor. He grabbed a towel, covered her, and called emergency services. His voice shook as he told them what he had found. As he waited for help to arrive, he tried to save her. He pressed down on her chest, trying to restart her heart. He performed CPR over and over. The warm shower water still ran, but her body remained cold. The color in her face was gone. He was desperate, praying she would wake up. But deep down, he already knew. By the time paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. Colleen Rebelo was gone. At first, it seemed like an inexplicable tragedy. There was no obvious cause of death, no wounds, no struggle. Even an autopsy was inconclusive. How could a perfectly healthy 58-year-old woman just die in the shower? Her children were devastated, but something didn't sit right. There were details that didn't make sense, and soon those little details would unravel into a horrifying truth, one that no one was prepared for. Coming up next, we dive into the strange inconsistencies that made Colleen's family question everything. What was Andre hiding, and why was he in such a hurry to claim the life insurance money? When someone dies unexpectedly, especially in their own home, those left behind search for answers. And in the days following Colleen Rebelo's death, her children struggled to make sense of what had happened. She had no life-threatening health conditions, no history of sudden medical episodes, No reason to believe she wouldn't wake up that morning, go about her day, and pick up her son from work, just as she had promised. At first, it seemed like an unexplained tragedy, a medical mystery. Even the police found no obvious cause for concern. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible injuries, no struggle. They ruled it a natural death. But something about that didn't sit right with Colleen's family. Fabian, the son who had found her lifeless in the shower, kept replaying the moment in his mind. The water was still running, her body was cold, and then there were the little things, things that didn't make sense. His mother was a woman of routine, of habit, and that morning something was off. For one, she was still wearing her jewelry and gold wristwatch. It was a small detail, but an important one. Colleen always took them off before stepping into the shower, always. But on the day she died, she still had them on. And then there was the anti-slip mat. Colleen had used it every single time she took a shower. It was something she never skipped, especially because of her minor heart condition. But on this day, it wasn't in place. Instead, it had been draped over the bathtub, almost as if someone had moved it. Still, with no immediate evidence of foul play, the family had no choice but to accept the police's conclusion. Colleen was gone, and the answers weren't coming. Until weeks later, an unexpected call changed everything. An insurance company had flagged something suspicious. A life insurance claim had been filed. And not just one, 3 separate policies had been taken out in Colleen's name. The beneficiary, Andre Rebello, and only Andre Rebello. In total, he stood to gain $1.15 million. His siblings? They weren't named in any of the policies. They wouldn't see a single cent. That alone was strange. But what truly set off alarm bells was how quickly Andre moved. Just 3 days after his mother's death, he was already making calls, demanding the insurance payout. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment. The insurance company wasn't convinced. Something about the timing, the paperwork, the sheer eagerness to claim the money made them hesitate. And when they started digging deeper, the lies began to unravel. The documents Andre submitted were forged. The insurance company found a falsified autopsy report, one that conveniently stated Colleen had died of a ruptured aneurysm causing a subarachnoid hemorrhage. But there was a problem. No such autopsy had ever been performed. And then another shocking discovery. Andre hadn't just faked insurance paperwork. He had also forged his own mother's will. In the altered version, he had named himself the sole heir to her estate. The deception was extensive, methodical, and most of all, cold. But with each lie that surfaced, one question grew louder and louder. Had Andre Rebello done more than just commit fraud? Had he orchestrated his mother's death? Investigators now had a new theory. Maybe Colleen's death wasn't natural at all. Maybe it was planned. And maybe the man who had spent his life carefully curating a fake image online had taken that illusion to deadly extremes. Coming up next, we uncover the shocking revelations that turned this case from a financial fraud investigation into a murder inquiry. What really happened in Colleen Rebello's home on that fateful morning? And why was Andre so desperate to keep the truth buried? With the insurance fraud exposed, investigators had their first real lead in the mysterious death of Colleen Rebello. What had once seemed like a tragic but natural passing was now something far more sinister. The question was no longer if something suspicious had happened, it was how deep the deception went. And as detectives began piecing together the puzzle, the truth became even darker than they had imagined. One of the first things investigators noticed was that Andre had wiped his digital footprint. After July 2020, there were no online records, no search history, no emails, no traces of his activity. It was as if he had deliberately erased everything. But why? What was he hiding? Then there was something even more alarming. Colleen's driving license was missing. No one in the family knew where it had gone, but soon they made a disturbing discovery. Andre had redirected all of his mother's mail to his own address. Every bill, every document, every piece of correspondence that should have been going to Colleen's home was now going straight to him. This wasn't an accident. This was a calculated move. And then there was the car. On the day Colleen died, around 1:30 p.m., her sister, Andre's aunt, was driving past her home when she saw a vehicle parked in the driveway, a car she didn't recognize. It stood out to her, but at the time she didn't think much of it. That was until weeks later when she saw the exact same car at Colleen's funeral. And this time she saw who was getting into it. It was Andre. When police questioned him, Andre denied everything. He insisted he had no involvement in his mother's death. But as the evidence mounted, his story began to shift. First, he claimed that Colleen had been suicidal, that she had expressed deep sadness about aging, and in his words, had even said that it might be better if she were no longer alive. But there was a problem with that story. No one else in the family had ever heard her say anything like that. Not Fabian, not Monique, not Julian. None of her children had ever seen signs that she was struggling. In fact, Colleen had just earned a degree at 58 years old. She was excited to start a new career. She had plans. And then a huge contradiction emerged. Andre's partner, Gracie Piscopo, had been asked about his whereabouts on the day of Colleen's death. Her response? It didn't match his. Gracie stated that on that morning she and her cousin had plans to go to lunch. But when it was time to leave, she realized Andre was gone. She had no idea where he had gone, and more importantly, he hadn't told her he was leaving. She called him 12 times. No answer. She texted him, still no response. According to Gracie, Andre vanished for hours, and when he finally returned at 2:00 p.m., he acted completely normal. He casually asked where they wanted to go for lunch, as if nothing had happened. But then, something even more disturbing came to light. By now, investigators were convinced Andre had planned everything, but they needed proof. They needed something concrete, so they took an extraordinary step. Police placed surveillance devices inside Andre and Gracie's home. They installed a listening device in the bedroom and a hidden camera in the living room. And for 3 months, they monitored every conversation. And what they heard was damning. From the recordings, it became clear that Gracie knew nothing about the insurance fraud. She was furious. She told Andre that he had put her in a terrible position, that this could ruin her career, that she could lose everything. She was afraid, not just for herself, but for her son. But Andre, he was confident. He told her not to worry, that nothing would happen to him, that he would get the insurance payout and they could leave the country. Andre wasn't just lying to the world. He was lying to the woman he claimed to love. He was hiding the truth from everyone. But now the walls were closing in. Coming up next, we take a closer look at how investigators finally closed in on Andre Rebello and how his years of deception finally led to his downfall. For nearly 2.5 years after Colleen Rebello's mysterious death, her family lived with uncertainty. They had questions but no answers, suspicions but no justice. Meanwhile, Andre Rebello continued living his life as though nothing had changed, posting online, playing the role of a devoted father and partner, maintaining the illusion of wealth and success. But that illusion was finally about to shatter. In November 2022, police made their move. Andre Rebello was arrested and charged with the murder of his own mother. The man who had spent years crafting a carefully curated public image was now standing before the world. Not as a successful investor, not as a devoted son, but as a man accused of cold-blooded murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The fraudulent insurance claims, the forged will, the missing driver's license, the erasure of his digital footprint, the suspicious timeline, the fact that he was at the house that morning and never mentioned it, and perhaps, most chilling of all, the fact that he had tried to claim his mother's life insurance payout just 3 days after her death. But despite all of this, there was one major hurdle for prosecutors. There was no direct physical evidence that Andre had killed his mother. No fingerprints, no DNA, no recorded confession. So how do you convict someone of murder without proving exactly how they did it? The prosecution had a difficult task ahead of them. When Andre's trial began in October 2024, it quickly became clear that the defense would argue that Colleen had died naturally, that her passing was just a tragic event, unrelated to Andre's financial crimes. But expert testimony would soon cast serious doubts on that claim. Medical examiners were called to the stand. They testified that while Colleen's official cause of death was inconclusive, the injuries on her body told a different story. Small abrasions were found on her eyebrows and arms, at first dismissed as insignificant. But forensic specialists had a different theory. Those small abrasions could have been caused by a struggle, by someone pressing a pillow over her face, a method of suffocation that leaves no obvious signs of trauma. If done correctly, it could mimic a natural death, and in this case, it nearly worked. The jury listened as forensic scientists explained that suffocation, particularly when done in a controlled environment, can leave minimal evidence. And given the timeline, the financial motive, and the forged documents, there was only one logical conclusion. Colleen Rebello hadn't died naturally. She had been murdered. For 8 weeks, the trial played out. The defense tried to argue that Andre had simply made poor financial choices, that he had committed fraud but was not a killer. But his own lies, his own desperation, and his own contradictions painted a different story. And on December 5th, 2024, after 2 days of jury deliberations, the courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Guilty. Andre Rebello was found guilty of his mother's murder. The same man who had built his life on deceit had finally been exposed. And this time, there was no escaping the truth. For Colleen's family, the verdict brought relief, but it did not erase the pain. A mother, a teacher, a woman who had spent her life caring for her children had been betrayed by the very son she had raised. And for what? For money. For an illusion. But Andre's story wasn't over just yet. The final chapter would come in April 2025, when his sentence would be handed down. And the expectation? Life in prison. No parole, no escape, no more lies. And as for the fraud charges, there will be no trial. Andre has already admitted to them. The insurance fraud, the forged will, the deception, it was all real. And yet none of it was enough. Because in the end, his plan failed. He didn't get the money. He didn't get away with it. A man who had once claimed to be a master of manipulation, who had fooled thousands online into believing he was a wealthy entrepreneur, will now spend the rest of his life behind bars. And his crime, the murder of his own mother, wasn't just about money. It was about desperation, arrogance, and the belief that he was smarter than everyone else. But in the end, the truth caught up with him. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the world we live in today. Social media isn't real life. What we see online is often a filtered, curated illusion, designed to impress, to gain followers, to appear perfect. But behind the scenes, the reality is often much darker. It also exposes the extremes of financial desperation, how the pressure to maintain an image, to live beyond one's means, can lead someone to commit unthinkable acts. Andre could have come clean about his struggles. He could have made different choices. Instead, he chose murder, and in the end, it didn't save him. It only sealed his fate. As we close this chapter, we're left with one final thought. Real life can't be filtered like an Instagram post. The truth always emerges, no matter how well it's hidden. And for Andre Rebello, the truth was his downfall. Thank you for joining us for this episode of True Crime Revealed. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that reveal the dark truths behind seemingly perfect lives. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, not everything is as it seems. In the world of exotic reptiles, few names were as respected as Ben Rennick. A world-renowned snake breeder, Ben had built an empire from his passion, breeding and selling some of the rarest and most valuable pythons in existence. His state-of-the-art reptile facility housed more than 3,000 snakes, drawing customers from around the world, from collectors to scientists and zoo specialists. But on June 8, 2017, Ben's thriving business became a crime scene. He was found lying face down in a pool of blood, his body surrounded by towering glass enclosures of slithering, coiled serpents. At first, whispers of a freak accident spread. Had one of his own snakes turned on him? Was this a case of a powerful python attacking its owner? Yet the reality was far more chilling. As investigators combed through the facility, they made a shocking discovery. Ben wasn't killed by a snake. He had been shot 8 times. A single bullet casing left behind shattered the illusion of an accident. It was murder. But who would want Ben dead? Meanwhile, a devoted father, a loving husband, a man on the brink of even greater success. Somewhere in the shadows, someone had carefully planned his execution. Was it jealousy? Money? Betrayal? Every true crime story begins with a life full of promise, dreams in motion, futures unfolding. But sometimes those closest to us are the ones who know exactly how to bring it all crashing down. Ben Rennick was a man on the rise. More than just a snake breeder, he was a pioneer in the reptile world, a businessman with an empire worth millions. His passion for rare and exotic snakes had made him a household name among collectors, researchers, and zoos. But beyond the industry, Ben was a devoted father, a loyal husband, and a man who believed in building something lasting, not just for himself, but for those he loved. To everyone who knew him, he was a man with everything to live for. Yet, as successful as he was in business, there were things even Ben could not see, shadows moving just beyond his line of sight. There was his wife who had stood beside him as he built his empire. She had dreams of her own, working to create a business in an entirely different field. To many, she was supportive, kind, and deeply involved in their life together. But behind closed doors, was everything as perfect as it seemed? Then there was his brother, his closest confidant, the person who had been with him through every major moment in life. The two had grown up side by side, built their futures on the same land, and shared an unbreakable bond. If anyone knew Ben, it was him. But bonds, even the strongest ones, can be tested. And when tragedy struck, suspicions would arise in places no one ever expected. And then, there were the friends, employees, and people who moved within Ben's orbit. Those who knew the inner workings of his business, the secrets of his personal life, and the hidden struggles that even he might not have acknowledged. The people in Ben Rennick's world each played a role in his final days. Some stood by him, some turned away, and one of them had something to hide. At first glance, their lives seemed ordinary. A loving family, a thriving business, a bright future. But beneath the surface, something was unraveling, something no one saw coming. Someone had a secret. Someone had a motive. Someone was about to ensure that Ben Rennick wouldn't make it out alive. Ben and Lindley Rennick seemed to have it all: a successful business, a growing family, and a bright future. From the outside, their marriage looked solid, a partnership built on mutual support and ambition. But beneath the surface, their relationship was crumbling, and the cracks were beginning to show. What started as small lies and hidden struggles soon spiraled into a dangerous game of deception, financial distress, and betrayal. Ben was a man at the peak of his career, a rising star in the reptile breeding world. His business was booming, and in 2017, he was on the verge of a major financial breakthrough, a lucrative deal worth $1.2 million. He had already received an initial payment of $200,000, a sum that could change his family's future. But what he didn't realize was that his own wife had secrets of her own, secrets that would soon lead to his untimely death. Lindley Rennick had dreams beyond being just a supportive wife. She had opened a spa, determined to build her own success, but unlike Ben's thriving business, hers was failing. The losses were piling up, the debts were growing, and Lindley, rather than confronting the truth, chose to hide it. She lied to Ben about the finances, covering up her mounting failures. But no lie stays hidden forever. As the financial strain intensified, Ben began to uncover the truth. He realized that Lindley had been lying about money, delaying payments, and deceiving him about the spa's losses. The tension between them escalated. Then, just hours before his murder, Ben sent a message to Lindley, a final warning that would later be seen as hauntingly prophetic. No more lying, no more keeping things from me. For Ben, it was a call for honesty, a demand to fix what was broken. But for Lindley, it was something else entirely, an ultimatum that threatened to expose her deception. And if there was one thing Lindley couldn't afford, it was to lose control. While Ben worked tirelessly to secure their future, Lindley was entangled in a web of lies and betrayals, slipping further away from the life they had built together. With her marriage unraveling, her finances in ruins, and $1 million deal just within reach, Lindley saw only one solution: Ben had to go. Whether it was for money, freedom, or simply to maintain control over the lies she had spun, the decision had been made. But the question remained: would she do it alone? Or was someone else willing to pull the trigger for her? What happened next would leave a world-renowned snake breeder dead in his own facility, his body lying in a pool of blood, while his wife played the role of the devastated widow. But behind the tears and the panic, a carefully orchestrated plan was unfolding, one that would take investigators years to unravel. June 8, 2017, it was a day like any other at Rennick Reptiles. Ben Rennick, a world-renowned snake breeder, was tending to his prized collection, surrounded by thousands of pythons, anacondas, and exotic reptiles worth millions. But by evening, his thriving business would become a crime scene. At approximately 5:30 p.m., Lindley Rennick arrived home. According to her, she went to check on her husband at the snake facility, only to stumble upon a horrific sight. Ben was lying face down on the cold concrete floor, motionless, a pool of blood expanding around him. His body was eerily still, surrounded by towering glass enclosures of slithering snakes. Panic set in. Lindley frantically dialed 911, her voice shaking as she claimed to have found her husband dead. Her initial reaction? A snake attack. In a facility housing over 3,000 exotic reptiles, it seemed like a plausible explanation. Perhaps one of the larger pythons had turned on him. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was just another occupational hazard in the world of reptile breeding. But when first responders arrived, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The scene was chaotic. Snakes hissed and moved within their enclosures as officers cautiously stepped inside. But something was missing. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of a snake bite, no signs that this was an accident at all. And then they saw it, a shell casing resting just above Ben's head on a nearby shelf. Suddenly, everything changed. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was a murder. As they examined Ben's body, the horrifying truth was revealed. He had been shot 8 times. The gunfire had been precise, methodical. This wasn't random. Someone had come here with the sole intention of killing Ben Rennick, and they had made sure he wouldn't survive. Now, investigators faced a chilling question. Who would want Ben dead, and why? In the wake of Ben Rennick's shocking murder, law enforcement worked quickly to unravel what had happened inside the snake facility that day. At first, investigators considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. After all, Ben's business was worth millions, and his collection of rare and exotic snakes was highly valuable. But a closer look at the facility revealed nothing had been stolen. Not a single snake was missing, nor had any of Ben's high-priced inventory been disturbed. Whoever had killed Ben hadn't come for the reptiles. They had come for him. With no signs of forced entry and no apparent struggle, suspicion quickly shifted to those closest to Ben. His brother Sam Rennick became an initial focus. He had a close relationship with Ben, but could there have been underlying tensions? Could a dispute over family, business, or inheritance have driven him to murder? Detectives questioned Sam extensively. They ran a gunshot residue test on his hands, analyzed his alibi, and even put him through a polygraph examination. The results? Sam was cleared. He had been nowhere near the crime scene when Ben was killed, and every piece of forensic evidence supported his innocence. He had lost not only his brother, but also his peace of mind, knowing that someone close to them had committed an unthinkable act. With Sam ruled out, investigators turned their attention elsewhere. One person remained at the center of it all. Lindley Rennick. Lindley, who had discovered Ben's body. Lindley, who had called 911 in a panic. Lindley, who now stood as the grieving widow. She too was subjected to a gunshot residue test. It came back negative. But investigators weren't ready to rule her out just yet. As they dug deeper, a more complex and disturbing picture began to emerge. One that had nothing to do with robbery and everything to do with lies, betrayal, and hidden motives. Ben had built a successful business, but his personal life was far from stable. Investigators combed through Lindley's phone records, Facebook messages, and financial transactions. And what they found changed everything. Lindley had been living a double life. She wasn't just a widow mourning her husband. She was a woman with secrets, multiple affairs, including one with Brandon Blackwell, a man she had met online, raised serious questions about her loyalty to Ben. Had her relationships played a role in what happened? Then came the financial records. Ben had recently discovered Lindley had been lying to him about money. Her spa business was failing. She was hiding debts. She was delaying payments. And just hours before his murder, Ben had sent her a message that read, "No more lying, no more keeping things from me." The deeper investigators dug, the darker the story became. The woman who once seemed like a devoted wife and mother was now appearing in a very different light. A woman in financial distress, a woman caught in deception, a woman with a possible motive. And soon they would learn she wasn't working alone. What at first seemed like a tragic loss was now looking more like a meticulously planned crime. But the most shocking revelations were yet to come. Because while Lindley Rennick had secrets, she wasn't the only one keeping them. And when the truth finally surfaced, it would be far more sinister than anyone. 4 months after Ben's murder, Lindley agreed to take a polygraph test, a critical moment in the investigation. She failed, miserably. The results sent a wave of suspicion through the case, but suspicion alone wasn't enough to make an arrest. With no physical evidence linking Lindley to the crime, no witnesses, and no weapon, law enforcement had nothing to hold her on. And so the case went cold. For nearly 3 years, Ben's family, his friends, and the reptile community were left in limbo. They pushed for answers. They pleaded for justice, but there were none. The man who had built a multi-million-dollar empire from his passion for reptiles had been brutally executed, and his killer had seemingly gotten away with it. Until finally a breakthrough. January 2020, an unexpected name surfaced. Brandon Blackwell. Brandon had once been one of Lindley's lovers, a man she had met online while still married to Ben. At first, he had seemed unimportant to the investigation, a fleeting relationship from Lindley's complicated personal life. But now he was talking, and what he had to say changed everything. Blackwell had been sitting in jail on charges of stalking and violating a restraining order filed by Lindley herself. He had nothing to lose and, apparently, a lot to reveal. And what he revealed was a murder plot far more twisted than anyone had imagined. According to Blackwell, Ben's death wasn't supposed to happen that way, because Lindley's first plan hadn't been with a gun, it had been with poison. Blackwell described how Lindley had first tried to kill Ben by lacing his protein shake with a lethal dose of narcotics. She had crushed up a massive amount of prescription pills, dissolving them into the drink, expecting Ben to pass out and never wake up. But somehow he survived. Maybe the dosage wasn't high enough. Maybe Ben had sensed something was off. Whatever the reason, the poison failed. And now Lindley had a problem. She needed a new plan, a plan that would not fail. With poisoning off the table, Lindley turned to an old connection, Michael Humphrey, her ex-boyfriend. Humphrey had a criminal past, and Lindley knew he was someone who could help her get the job done. On June 8, 2017, the plan was set in motion. Lindley and Michael drove to Rennick Reptiles. Michael had the gun. The intention was clear. Ben was not leaving the facility alive. But when they arrived, things didn't go exactly as planned. Blackwell's confession revealed something chilling. Michael Humphrey backed out at the last moment. He handed the gun to Lindley and told her, "This is something you have to do yourself." And she did. She stepped inside the snake facility. She raised the gun. She fired 8 rounds into the man she had once promised to love. Ben Rennick never stood a chance. And with that, the case was no longer a mystery. The truth was finally out, and police were ready to make their move. For nearly 3 years, Ben's killer had walked free. But now the evidence was undeniable. A failed poisoning attempt. A premeditated murder plot. A shooter who was no longer a mystery. On January 16, 2020, Lindley Rennick and Michael Humphrey were arrested, charged with first-degree murder. The woman who had once stood as a grieving widow was now exposed as something else entirely. But her fight wasn't over yet, because now she had to convince a jury that she wasn't the mastermind behind her husband's murder. For years, Lindley had surrounded herself with people she could manipulate, people who had helped her keep her secrets. One of those people was Ashley Shaw, a close friend and employee at her failing spa. Ashley had been involved from the beginning. She had helped Lindley in the weeks leading up to the murder, had listened to the planning, and had even played a role after Ben was dead. But when the pressure mounted and police closed in, Ashley made a choice. She flipped. In exchange for immunity, she told police everything. Her testimony exposed the full extent of Lindley's deadly plan. Lindley had asked Ashley to get prescription pills she intended to use to poison Ben before the shooting ever took place. She had confessed to Ashley that she had pulled the trigger herself after Michael Humphrey backed out at the last moment. After the murder, Lindley returned to the spa, where Ashley helped her wash away the evidence, scrubbing her body clean of the remnants of the crime. With Ashley Shaw's confession, the prosecution now had an airtight case, one that would soon bring Lindley Rennick to trial. Michael Humphrey, the man who had driven Lindley to the murder scene and put a gun in her hands, was the first to face trial. While he hadn't pulled the trigger, prosecutors argued that he had been a willing accomplice, a key figure in the planning and execution of Ben's murder. A jury agreed. Michael Humphrey was convicted of first-degree murder. Facing a life sentence, Humphrey saw one final opportunity to help himself: cooperation. And so, he turned against Lindley, revealing the final missing piece. With his help, investigators located the gun used to kill Ben, hidden away for nearly 3 years, the ultimate piece of physical evidence that tied Lindley directly to the crime. Now, with a witness confession, a murder weapon, and a clear motive, Lindley was out of options. In December 21, Lindley Rennick's trial began. Her defense strategy? Blame Michael Humphrey. She claimed innocence, insisting she had been present at the crime scene but had nothing to do with the murder. She portrayed herself as a victim, saying Humphrey was the real killer and that she had been too afraid to stop him. But prosecutors dismantled her web of lies one by one. The failed poisoning attempt, proof that this was a premeditated crime, not a spur-of-the-moment act. Ashley Shaw's testimony, first-hand accounts of Lindley's confessions and planning. Michael Humphrey's cooperation, his admission that Lindley was the one who fired the fatal shots. The recovered murder weapon, physical evidence that Lindley could no longer deny. In the end, the jury didn't buy her story. After 12 hours of deliberation, they reached a verdict. Lindley Rennick was found guilty of second-degree murder and armed criminal action. But what came next left many outraged. Her sentence? 13 years in prison for murder, 3 additional years for armed criminal action, a total of 16 years behind bars. For many, including Ben's family and friends, the sentence was far too lenient. Ben's brother, Sam Rennick, had spent years waiting for justice. But now, standing in the courtroom, he struggled to accept what he was hearing. 16 years, that's all. For the cold-blooded execution of his brother, the woman responsible would walk free before her 50s. For Sam, it felt like a slap in the face. The judge himself acknowledged the light sentence, telling Lindley,
"You're awful lucky, ma'am. You're going to get out in your 40s, and my 40s weren't too bad. I just hope you don't kill again. That's it."
For Ben's loved ones, there was no real justice, no sentence that could ever bring back the man they had lost. A man who had dedicated his life to breeding some of the most misunderstood creatures on Earth, only to be betrayed by the one person he trusted the most. For the reptile community, Ben Rennick's death was more than just a headline. It was a devastating loss. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a pioneer, a visionary breeder, a man whose passion for reptiles had changed the industry. To honor him, a rare mutation of a snake was named after him, the Rennick ghost, a fitting tribute to a man who dedicated his life to creatures often misunderstood, only to be betrayed by the one person he never saw coming. For Sam Rennick, the pain of losing his brother never truly fades. He had shared a life with Ben, had worked alongside him, had built a future together, and in one moment, all of it was taken away. But Sam refused to let his brother's memory disappear. He vowed to raise Ben's children, to protect them from the horrors of their mother's betrayal, and to ensure that his brother's legacy lived on. For Sam, justice may have been served in the courtroom, but no prison sentence, whether 16 years or life, could bring back what was lost. Ben Rennick dedicated his life to handling some of the deadliest creatures on Earth. But in the end, it wasn't a snake that killed him. It wasn't a venomous bite. It wasn't the strength of a constrictor. It wasn't the dangers of his profession. It was the woman he shared his home with. The greatest threats don't always come from the wild. Sometimes they sleep beside you. If you found this case fascinating and want to hear more shocking true crime stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your fellow crime enthusiasts. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We've got more incredible cases coming your way. Do you have a true crime case you want us to cover? A mystery that still haunts you? Drop it in the comments below, and we just might feature it in a future episode. And finally, what do you think? Did Lindley Rennick get what she deserved, or did the justice system go too easy on her? Let us know your thoughts. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on True Crime Revealed. Stay safe. And remember, the most dangerous predators aren't always the ones in the wild. A peaceful farm in the countryside of Phrae, Thailand, a place where a wealthy couple built a life of tranquility. But that peace was shattered by a horrifying secret, a shocking discovery. Two bodies buried 2 meters deep near the duck pen. No signs of robbery, no obvious clues. Only one strange detail. The couple's brand new pickup truck had disappeared. The police launched an investigation, scouring security cameras, and soon they made a chilling discovery. Two shadowy figures were caught sneaking onto the farm. One of them drove away in the stolen truck, disappearing into the night. And with that, the case hit a dead end. Until one day a neighbor walked into the police station and revealed a horrifying truth, a secret that left the entire community in shock. Who was the real murderer? And what led this family to such a tragic end? I'm Don, and you're listening to True Crime Revealed, where we uncover the dark realities behind true crime cases that shock the world. Let's begin. Before tragedy struck, Alan Hogg was a successful businessman from Edinburgh, Scotland. A skilled engineer, he had owned a specialized dry cleaning company, amassing considerable wealth. But instead of living a lavish life, Alan found peace in an unexpected place, Thailand. And it was there that he met the love of his life, Nod Sudan. Nod was a kind-hearted woman, deeply devoted to her family. She not only provided financial support to her relatives, but also took care of her disabled younger brother. Despite being married to a millionaire, Nod remained humble, generous, and always willing to help those in need. In 2014, the couple decided to settle in Thailand, building a vast 32-hectare farm in a beautiful 3-story villa. They wanted a quiet, peaceful life surrounded by nature. But tragically, this very place would become their final resting ground. And the man behind it all? None other than Nod's own brother, Warut Sachit. Warut was once a trusted member of the family. He lived on Alan and Nod's property, working as the farm's caretaker. But over time, tensions between Warut and Alan began to rise. Alan was a disciplined businessman with high expectations, while Warut was lazy and unreliable. Alan's constant criticisms fueled Warut's resentment, and when Nod started siding with her husband, Warut felt utterly betrayed. The anger inside him grew, simmering over the years, until it finally exploded into a deadly plan. What started as small disagreements soon grew into an unspoken war. Alan Hogg was a businessman, disciplined, methodical, and precise. Warut Sachit was the opposite, careless, slow, and resistant to change. Alan had given Warut the opportunity to work on the farm, but instead of seeing it as a privilege, Warut saw it as an insult. He resented Alan's constant supervision, his demands for efficiency, his expectations for hard work. For Alan, it was about maintaining order. For Warut, it was about control. He dismissed Alan's instructions, ignored his criticisms, and slowly the tension between them escalated. But the breaking point wasn't Alan, it was Nod. For years, Nod had tolerated her brother's flaws, choosing to see the best in him. But even she could no longer ignore his laziness, his growing defiance. When she finally sided with Alan, Warut felt a deep humiliation. His own sister had turned against him. And the man he despised, the foreigner who had taken over his family's land, had won. The resentment inside Warut festered. His anger, once a simmering frustration, began to consume him. And soon, it became something far darker. By mid-September, Warut's rage had reached its peak. And then, the final blow came. On September 15, 2018, Nod visited her youngest brother. In a quiet, tense conversation, she revealed her frustrations. Warut was no longer pulling his weight, no longer helping the farm, no longer listening. And so a decision was made. Warut had to leave. Alan and Nod had given him countless chances. Too many chances. But now it was over. Warut would have to pack his things and go. That evening, Warut sat alone outside his wooden home, staring at the villa in the distance. It was no longer his. Soon, the land, the life he had always known, would be gone. And as he sat there, bitterness filled his mind, twisting into something unrecognizable. If he couldn't have this life, neither could they. But Warut had a problem. He couldn't carry out the plan alone. He needed help. And more than anything, he needed money. That's when an idea took shape, an idea as simple as it was deadly. He would sell Alan and Nod's brand new pickup truck, and he would use that money to have them killed. There was one man who could help him, Suma Uthpamon, a local neighbor. Warut approached him, carefully choosing his words, testing the waters. He didn't need to convince Suma to pull the trigger. He just needed someone who knew the right people. And Suma did. Through Suma, Warut was introduced to two men, killers for hire. Their names? Pia Kamai, 63 years old, and Kapang Kaman, just 24. Different generations, but the same ruthless ambition. For them, this was just another job. A price was named, a deal was made, and Alan and Nod's fate was sealed. The plan was simple, the execution brutal. The sun was setting over the quiet farm. It was September 18, 2018, a day that should have been like any other. But tonight, this peaceful home would become the scene of a brutal double murder. At exactly 6:00 p.m., Warut Sachet arrived at the farm with two men, Pia Kamai and Kapang Kaman. The killers for hire had been promised payment. Now it was time to finish the job. Alan Hogg was in the backyard feeding the ducks, completely unaware of the danger lurking behind him. Pia Kamai, the 63-year-old hitman, took his position, raising a small caliber handgun. He took aim. The first shot hit Alan in the chest. He staggered, confused, his body jerking from the impact. Before he could react, the second shot was fired, straight to his head. He collapsed instantly, his blood soaking into the dirt near the duck pen. Alan Hogg, the man who had built a home on this land, was dead. Inside the house, Nod Sudain was preparing for the evening, unaware that just meters away, her husband had been executed. Kapang Kaman, the younger of the two killers, slipped inside. He moved quickly, grabbing Nod from behind, one hand clamping over her mouth before she could scream. She fought back, kicking and struggling, but he was stronger. He dragged her from the kitchen, forcing her into the garage. And there, waiting for her, was Warut, her own brother. Pinned down and helpless, Nod looked up at the man she had once trusted. But there was no hesitation in Warut's eyes, no sign of mercy. He lifted a heavy wrench and brought it crashing down on her skull. One blow, then another, and another. The force shattered her bones, her body convulsed, then went still. Nod Sudden was dead, murdered by the very person who should have protected her. With the killings done, there was only one task left, getting rid of the evidence. The three men dragged Alan's lifeless body across the farm, bringing it toward the duck pen where he had died. Nod's body was pulled from the garage, her limp frame leaving streaks of blood on the concrete. At the edge of the property, they had already prepared a grave, a hole 2 meters deep, freshly dug in the soft earth. One by one, the bodies were lowered inside. The dirt was shoveled back into place, the ground smoothed over as if nothing had happened. Alan and Nod were gone, buried beneath the very land they had worked so hard to build. But even the most carefully executed crimes leave behind traces. Warut and his accomplices thought they had covered their tracks, but in the days to come, small mistakes would lead to their downfall. What were those mistakes, and how did the police finally uncover the truth? Alan Hogg and Nod Sudden had vanished. They weren't answering their phones. They missed a scheduled meeting. For Alan, a man known for his punctuality and discipline, this was highly unusual. Their friends began to worry. At first, they thought maybe the couple had gone on an unplanned trip, but as days passed with no sign of them, concern turned into fear. One friend decided to check on them. On September 23, 2018, a close friend of Alan Hogg drove to the couple's 32-acre farm in Phrae Province. As he arrived, something felt off. The house was unlocked. Everything inside was untouched. Clothes, luggage, even their phones were still there. There were no signs of a sudden trip. But one thing stood out. Their brand new pickup truck was missing. As the friend walked further into the house, he made a chilling discovery. Blood stains in the dressing room. Someone had tried to clean them, but the traces remained. This was no ordinary disappearance. Something terrible had happened. Without hesitation, he called the police. Police in Phrae Province arrived at the scene promptly. They searched every corner of the 3-story villa, gathering evidence and questioning anyone who might have information. But the farm was vast, over 32 acres, making the search difficult. If foul play was involved, the bodies could be hidden anywhere. Then officers noticed something unusual, a patch of disturbed soil near the duck pen. No other part of the property had been dug up recently. This immediately raised suspicion. To confirm their doubts, the police brought in sniffer dogs. The dogs rushed to the disturbed soil, barking and digging furiously. It was clear they had detected something beneath the ground. The police ordered an excavation team to dig. Within 2 hours, their worst fears were confirmed. 2 bodies buried 2 meters deep. A man, a woman. Their clothes still intact, their bodies carefully placed. There was no doubt this was Alan Hogg and Nod Soden. The quiet community of Frey was in shock. The couple, once known for their generosity and kindness, had been murdered and buried in their own backyard. But the most haunting question remained. Who did this, and why? The bodies were immediately transported to a forensic lab for autopsy. The results revealed the horrifying truth. Alan Hogg had been shot twice, 1 bullet to the chest, another to the head. His death was instant. Nod Sudden had suffered an even more brutal fate. She had been bludgeoned to death with a heavy wrench. Her skull was shattered. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was pure, calculated murder. 2 different methods, 2 precise killings, and both bodies buried together. Whoever did this had planned it carefully. The police now had no doubt. This was a premeditated crime. And the most terrifying part? The murderer was likely someone they knew. Despite uncovering the bodies, the police still lacked something crucial. Solid evidence pointing to the killer. Who had the strongest motive? Who stood to gain the most from Alan and Nod's deaths? All clues pointed toward one person, someone no one had suspected. But the police needed more than just suspicions. They needed evidence, and they needed a confession. As investigators scoured the evidence, they turned to one of the most powerful tools in modern crime solving, CCTV footage. And what they found would change the course of the case. Footage from inside and outside the property revealed a shocking lead. The person seen driving away in Alan's stolen pickup truck was none other than Warut Sachit, Nod's own brother. Warut had always been close to the couple. He lived on their property, worked on their farm, and was considered part of their inner circle. But now he was the last known person seen in possession of their truck. Police quickly named Warut Sachit as the prime suspect, but there was one problem. He was gone. With a suspect identified, police launched a full-scale manhunt. They searched the surrounding areas, questioned neighbors, and followed every lead. But Warut had disappeared. He had seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but suspicion. Authorities expanded their search, believing he might have fled to a nearby province or even crossed the border. But without a concrete lead, they had no way of knowing where he had gone. As investigators continued their search, they turned their attention to the only missing piece of physical evidence, Alan and Nod's stolen pickup truck. If Warut had taken the truck, where was it now? Police traced the vehicle's movements, following a complex web of sales and exchanges. The truck had been sold multiple times, passing through different hands across different towns. Each new owner had no idea about the gruesome crime attached to the vehicle. By the time police located the final buyer, any physical evidence that might have linked Warut to the murder had been lost. The truck was no longer enough to prove his guilt. Despite their suspicions, police lacked a crucial piece of evidence. Concrete proof tying Warut directly to the crime. He was arrested, questioned, and pressed for answers. But Warut denied everything. Without forensic evidence, without a murder weapon, and without a confession, the case stood on shaky ground. The court had no choice but to grant Warut bail. And just like that, the case hit a dead end. For a while, it seemed as if Warut would escape justice, but then an unexpected witness came forward. A neighbor named Suma Uthpamon walked into the police station with a confession that would break the case wide open. Suma hesitated as he spoke, his voice uneasy. He admitted that before the murders, Warut had approached him with a chilling request. He wanted help in hiring hitmen to kill Alan and Nod. At first, Suma refused, but Warut was persistent. Eventually, Suma introduced him to two men who were willing to carry out the job. For his involvement, Suma received a payment of 25,000 baht, and now, with guilt weighing on his conscience, he was ready to tell the police everything. With Suma's confession, the police finally had the missing link they needed. They now had names, connections, and a direct witness who could testify to Warut's role in orchestrating the murders. The hunt for justice was back on. But how would authorities capture Warut and the hired killers? And what punishment awaited them? Armed with Suma's testimony, police wasted no time. Raids were carried out across the province. One by one, the suspects were caught. First, Pia Kamai and Kapang Kaman were arrested in their homestays. With overwhelming evidence against them, both men quickly confessed to their roles in the murder. Then came the most crucial arrest. Warut Sachit, the man who had once been a trusted family member, the man who had plotted the murders of his own sister and brother-in-law, was finally taken into custody. Under police interrogation, Warut cracked. He admitted everything. He had orchestrated the entire crime, driven by greed, jealousy, and resentment. He had paid the killers. He had personally taken Nad's life. And now, justice was closing in on him. In June 2019, nearly a year after the brutal murders, the case finally went to trial. The evidence was clear. The confessions had sealed their fate, and the court's ruling would send a powerful message. Warut Sachit was convicted as the mastermind behind the crime. He had arranged everything, hiring the killers, selling Alan's truck to fund the murders, and personally executing his own sister. Pia Kamai and Kapang Kamanan, the hired hitmen, were also convicted. All three men received the harshest punishment possible: death sentences. As for Suma Uth Pamon, his cooperation with the police led to a reduced sentence. Instead of facing the death penalty, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The court described the murder of Alan Hogg and Nad Sadin as a crime that had damaged Thailand's reputation. The case had gained international attention, and the brutal nature of the killings had horrified the nation. For Alan and Nad's daughter, Robin Hogg, the verdict brought some closure. She had lost both of her parents in a crime of unthinkable cruelty, but at least now, justice had been served. The trial marked the end of a tragic chapter, but it also left behind a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from within our own families. The murder of Alan Hogg and Nad Sudden was not just about greed. It was about envy, resentment, and a sense of entitlement that led a man to commit the ultimate act of betrayal. Warut had been given a home, a boom, a life of stability, but instead of gratitude, he let his jealousy consume him. And in the end, that jealousy destroyed not only Alan and Nad, but also himself. The story of Alan and Nad serves as a dark lesson that trust can be misplaced, and that sometimes the most dangerous people are those closest to us. But in the end, justice was served, and the memory of Alan and Nad lives on. Thank you for joining us in today's episode of Shadows of Crime. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated on more shocking true crime cases. What do you think about this case? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and stay vigilant. Welcome back to True Crime Revealed, where we uncover the most chilling cases, dissect the facts, and expose the failures that allow dangerous individuals to walk free. Today's story is one that will leave you both heartbroken and outraged. It was March 12, 2023, when police in Vancouver, Washington, received a frantic call from a desperate grandmother. Her 27-year-old daughter, Michelle Melendez, and her 6-year-old granddaughter, Layla Stewart, had vanished. The fear in her voice was unmistakable. This was not a simple case of a mother running away or cutting off contact. Something was terribly wrong. Michelle was a devoted single mother, her world revolving around her little girl. She was not the type to disappear without a trace. When her phone went silent and her apartment was eerily empty, those closest to her knew this was no accident. Something sinister had happened. As the police investigation began, a disturbing truth emerged. A dark figure from Michelle's past came into focus: her ex-boyfriend, Kirkland Warren. What detectives uncovered was more than a missing persons case. It was a tale of abuse, manipulation, and murder. A case that would send shockwaves through Vancouver and raise serious questions about the justice system's failure to protect victims of domestic violence. How did a violent criminal with a murder charge in another state get to walk free? And more importantly, could this tragedy have been prevented? Today, we dive deep into the tragic case of Michelle Melendez and her daughter Layla, a story of love, betrayal, and a system that failed to intervene before it was too late. Stay with us, because what we uncover next will shock you. To truly understand this case, we need to know the people at the center of it, the lives that were lost, the relationships that shaped this tragedy, and the dark history that foreshadowed its inevitable outcome. Let's start with Michelle Melendez, a 27-year-old single mother, strong-willed and devoted to giving her daughter the best life possible. She worked hard, was independent, and despite life's challenges, she never gave up on her dreams or her child. To Michelle, being a mother wasn't just a role, it was her entire world. Her daughter, Layla Stewart, was a bright and joyful 6-year-old, a little girl who radiated happiness. She loved dancing on TikTok, adored kittens, and had a future full of possibilities. Layla was everything to her mother, and their bond was unbreakable. But the love they shared would soon collide with a dangerous force, one that had been lurking in Michelle's life for far too long. Michelle's mother and siblings knew something was wrong the moment they lost contact. She wasn't the type to disappear without notice. Her absence was a warning sign, one that, tragically, came too late. The man last seen with Michelle and Layla was her ex-boyfriend, Kirkland Warren, a name already known to law enforcement for all the wrong reasons. Kirkland was originally from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a place where his violent past first began. In 2017, he was charged with murder after shooting a man in the head and leaving his body in a ditch. But somehow he was released on bond, allowing him to flee across the country to Washington State. This was not a one-time act of violence. This was who Kirkland was, a man with a history of control, abuse, and manipulation. His relationship with Michelle was toxic and dangerous, an on-again, off-again nightmare that came with police reports and restraining orders. And yet, despite everything, he kept finding his way back into her life. Michelle tried to break free from him. She even filed a restraining order, but Kirkland ignored it, violating it over and over again. And the system, it failed her, time after time. But Michelle wasn't the only woman connected to Kirkland. He was also married to a woman named Monet Tyler Warren, who lived in Portland, Oregon. Monet worked at a local bank, but beneath the surface, she was involved in something much darker. She was caught stealing nearly $25,000 from customer accounts, and police suspected she was part of a financial scheme, one that may have even involved Michelle. Was Michelle just an unwitting participant, or was she trapped in something she couldn't escape from? And how much did Kirkland have to do with all of it? Two women, both connected to a dangerous man. One of them ended up dead, the other facing criminal charges. But before authorities could untangle the truth behind the financial fraud, something far worse happened. Michelle and Layla vanished, and the search for answers was only just beginning. Coming up next, the night of their disappearance, the lies Kirkland told police, and the chilling moment when two lifeless bodies were found. By the time Michelle Melendez and her daughter Layla Stewart disappeared, the warning signs were already there, but no one acted fast enough. The system had multiple chances to protect them, but each opportunity slipped away, leading to the inevitable tragedy. Let's go back to December 22. Michelle makes a terrifying call to 911. She tells police that her ex-boyfriend, Kirkland Warren, shot at her balcony window while she was standing there. This wasn't just an argument gone too far. This was a clear act of attempted murder. Kirkland wasn't just angry, he was dangerous. But what did police do? Nothing substantial. There was no immediate arrest, no swift action to remove him from her life. And this would be the first major failure in this case. Fast forward to February 2023, and something strange happens. Michelle recants her statement. She tells authorities she lied, that Kirkland never fired a gun. She even goes so far as to claim that she and a friend, who had also witnessed the shooting, both suffered from mental health and substance abuse issues, completely discrediting her own case. But was this the truth? Or was she coerced into taking it back? We've seen this pattern far too often. A woman terrified of her abuser, knowing that if he goes free, he will come back even angrier. And the courts, they believed her recantation. They let him go. Then on March 2023, Kirkland is finally arrested. The charges: domestic violence, making threats, illegal possession of a firearm, and a drive-by shooting. This should have been the moment where things turned around. And yet, it wasn't. Kirkland had one of the highest risk assessment scores police had ever seen, 31 on a scale of 1 to 18. This meant he was considered an extreme danger to Mache and anyone around him. And yet, despite all of this, despite his past, the court still gave him a way out. Just 4 days later, on March 6, 2023, Kirkland is released on bail. Let's be clear, this wasn't just a mistake. It was a death sentence. The judge ordered GPS monitoring, but guess what? It never happened. The man who violated a restraining order, who had attempted to kill Mache before, who was still facing a murder charge in Arkansas, was now back on the streets, free to do whatever he wanted. And what he wanted was to make sure Mache never spoke out against him again. It's March 12, 2023, a Sunday morning in Vancouver, Washington. The streets are quiet, the world is still waking up. But somewhere in the early hours of the day, a mother and daughter are about to take a ride they will never return from. At 5 o'clock a.m., Mache Melendez and her 6-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart, step into Kirkland Warren's Dodge Charger. They're leaving a friend's apartment where they'd been staying for the night. Mache, still in the on-again, off-again relationship with Kirkland, had gone back to him once more. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was hope that things would get better. Maybe it was a forced situation she couldn't escape. But whatever the reason, this ride would be her last. Hours later, a friend spots Kirkland's car again, but something is horrifyingly wrong. Inside the vehicle, Mache is unconscious in the passenger seat. She is naked from the waist down. And in the back seat, Layla, the innocent 6-year-old girl, sitting in the car with a man she trusted, completely unaware of the terror unfolding in front of her. That friend, Thomas' friend, the last person to see them alive, doesn't stop the car, doesn't question it. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she didn't realize the deadly danger Mache and Layla were already in. Because just hours later, Kirkland drives away. And from that moment on, Mache Melendez and Layla Stewart are never seen alive again. For 6 days, there's silence. No one hears from Mache. No texts, no calls, nothing. Her family grows frantic. Her mother, who spoke to her every day, now can't reach her at all. And that's when they know something is very wrong. On March 18, 2023, Mache's family officially reports her and Layla missing. The Vancouver Police Department immediately conducts a welfare check at Mache's apartment. They find nothing, no signs of a struggle, no indications of where she and Layla might be. But then, the next day, a chilling discovery is made. Mache's car, a burgundy Dodge Charger, is found abandoned in the Van Mall neighborhood. This is the same area where she had stayed with Kirkland on the night of March 11th, the very last place she was known to be. The questions multiply. Where could they be? Why would Mache's car be left behind? And most importantly, why isn't Kirkland answering any questions? What happened in those 6 missing days? And could the police have saved them if they acted sooner? Coming up next, the shocking discoveries, the lies Kirkland told police, and the horrifying truth behind what really happened to Mache and Layla. For 6 days, the Melendez family held on to hope. They checked Mache's favorite places, called her phone over and over, and pleaded with police to do something. But on March 19, 2023, the truth started to unravel, and the reality of what happened was far worse than anyone imagined. The first break in the case came when police searched Kirkland Warren's house and car. What they found, a nightmare. In his Dodge Charger, police discovered blood evidence, shell casings, and something even more chilling, a large blue tarp. This tarp would later become one of the most critical pieces of evidence, pointing to premeditation. Kirkland was taken into custody that same day, but he refused to cooperate. He played dumb, claiming he had no idea where Mache and Layla were. But behind closed doors, police were already piecing together the truth. 3 days later, on March 22, 2023, a 911 call came into the Clark County Sheriff's Office. A passerby in a rural area near Washogal, Washington, had noticed something strange, a pair of lifeless figures down an embankment near a creek. But at first, they didn't believe it was real. They described them as mannequins, dumped, abandoned, left to decay. But when officers arrived, the truth was undeniable. Two bodies discarded like trash, and within hours, police confirmed their identities. Michelle Melendez and her 6-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart. They had both been shot in the head. Michelle executed with a single gunshot. Layla shot twice. A child, her life barely begun, taken in the most cold-blooded way imaginable. But what's worse, the medical examiner's report showed that before she was murdered, Layla had been assaulted. A 6-year-old girl, innocent, trusting, and her last moments were spent in unimaginable terror. But even without Kirkland's confession, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Police found text messages Kirkland sent to friends asking where to bury a gun, money transfers from Michelle's phone, her bank account drained after she vanished, blood and shell casings in his car, physical proof of a violent struggle. That blue tarp, suggesting he planned to hide their bodies all along. But what stands out the most? His timeline. Kirkland claimed he had nothing to do with their disappearance, but police already knew he was lying. Because on March 18th, just hours before they were officially reported missing, Kirkland had sent another text message, one that said everything police needed to hear. I need to get rid of this Stolo. Stolo, slang for a stolen car. And what was the last vehicle Michelle and Layla were seen in? Kirkland Warren's Dodge Charger. Coming up next, the arrest, the trial, and the moment Kirkland Warren finally faced justice. Detectives confront Kirkland with the truth. Where is Michelle? Where is Layla? They ask. And his response? A flat denial. I don't know where they are. He sits back, calm, collected, like a man who believes he can talk his way out of anything. But the detectives keep pressing. They remind him that his car is filled with blowout evidence, that Michelle's bank account was drained from her own phone, that he was caught searching for places to hide a gun. And still, he denies it. Then he does what so many guilty men do. He tries to shift the blame. He tells detectives that maybe Michelle's ex-husband had something to do with it, that maybe she ran off, that maybe, just maybe, she's still alive. But detectives aren't buying it. And as they continue to confront him with the truth, Kirkland knows he has to change his story. So he tries one last lie. He claims that Michelle shot her own daughter and then turned the gun on herself, that he had nothing to do with it, that somehow, in the middle of an argument, a mother killed her child and herself, despite the fact that she had been shot execution style, despite the fact that her body had been dumped in a remote area, despite the fact that Kirkland had tried to cover it up. But here's the thing about forensic evidence. It doesn't lie. And the truth was already written in blood. By now, detectives had more than enough to charge Kirkland Warren with 2 counts of first-degree murder. They presented their case to prosecutors, who quickly realized this wasn't Kirkland's first time killing someone. Because back in 2010 in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, there was another murder case, one that had been sitting unsolved for years. The victim, Curtis Urart, shot in the head, his body dumped in a ditch, just like Michelle and Layla. And in a shocking turn, the prosecutors in Washington linked Kirkland's crimes to the Arkansas murder. They didn't just charge him with Michelle and Layla's deaths. They pushed to extradite him back to Arkansas to finally face justice for Curtis Urart's murder as well. So now, Kirkland Warren wasn't just a domestic abuser. He wasn't just a murderer of a mother and child. He was a serial killer, and this time, there would be no way out. For months, Michelle Melendez's family had waited for answers, for justice, for closure. And now they were about to get it. Kirkland Warren, the man who stole a mother and daughter from this world, the man who thought he could outsmart the system, was finally about to face the consequences of his crimes. When the case finally went to trial, there was no denying the evidence. The blood in Kirkland's car, the shell casings, the bank transfers, the text messages, the blue tarp. It all pointed to one thing: premeditated murder. Kirkland had a choice to make. He could drag the families through a lengthy trial, or he could admit to what he had done. And in the end, he did just that. He pleaded to both murders. There would be no trial, no chance for him to manipulate a jury. The sentence? Life in prison, no parole, no second chances. And for Mache's family, it was a moment of relief, but it didn't erase the pain. They would never get to see Mache smile again, never get to hear Layla's laughter, never get the chance to hold them, to say goodbye properly. But they knew that Kirkland would never walk free again, and that, at the very least, was something. But there was one more crime Kirkland had to answer for. Because remember, Mache and Layla weren't his first victims. In Arkansas, Curtis Urart's family had been waiting too. For years, they had lived with the pain of knowing their loved one's killer was still free. And now, they would finally get justice too. Kirkland was extradited back to Arkansas, where he pleaded guilty to the 2017 murder of Curtis Urart. And for that crime, he was sentenced to another life term. That meant, no matter what happened, no matter where he was held, Kirkland Warren would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But Kirkland wasn't the only one facing charges. His wife, Moni Tyler Warren, had played a different role in this story. While she wasn't responsible for the murders, she was involved in a financial scheme that connected back to Mache. Investigators discovered that Monet had stolen nearly $25,000 from bank customers, using her job at a credit union to transfer the funds. And who else was linked to those fraudulent transfers? Mache. But was Mache a willing participant, or was she coerced by Kirkland, just as she had been in her relationship? We may never know for sure, but what we do know is that Monet pleaded guilty to financial crimes. Her punishment, 2 years probation. At the end of the day, Kirkland Warren is where he belongs. But does that mean justice was truly served? Because if you ask Mache's mother, if you ask Layla's classmates, if you ask anyone who loved them, the answer is simple. Justice should have come before they were murdered. This case isn't just about a killer getting what he deserves. It's about a broken system that let him kill. A man with a history of violence, free on bail. A mother who begged for protection, ignored. A little girl who trusted the wrong person, never stood a chance. So yes, Kirkland Warren will die in prison, but for Mache and Layla, justice did not come soon enough. And that brings us to our final question. What can we do to stop this from happening again? This case is not just about one man's crimes, it's about a system that failed at every turn. It's about warnings ignored, restraining orders that meant nothing. A killer allowed to walk free when he should have been locked away long before he took 2 more lives. The news of Mache and Layla's murders shook Vancouver to its core. In the days after their bodies were found, the community came together to grieve and to demand change. A vigil was held in Esther Short Park, where hundreds of people gathered, lighting candles in honor of Mache and Layla's memory. Friends, family, and even strangers who had never met them stood side by side, united in sorrow, but also in frustration. They weren't just mourning, they were angry. Mache's family spoke that night, their voices shaking with grief and rage. Her mother stood before the crowd and said, "She was my whole world." Her brother, barely able to hold back tears, added, "Judges and DAs failed us. They failed her. They failed Layla." But this wasn't just another tragic story. This case sparked something bigger. Across the country, advocates for domestic violence survivors pointed to Mache's case as an example of why our system needs to change. Because this isn't just about Kirkland Warren. There are thousands of abusers out there who, just like him, have a history of violence, threats, restraining order violations, and still they walk free. Advocates are now pushing for stricter monitoring of high-risk domestic violence offenders, harsher penalties for violating restraining orders, reforming the bail system to keep violent criminals from walking free. Because the truth is, this didn't have to happen. And if we don't learn from it, if we don't change the system that allowed it, it will happen again. Mache Melendez and Layla Stewart should still be here. They should be laughing, living, dancing on TikTok, making memories together. But instead, they became another tragic statistic, another story of a system that failed to act. And the only thing we can do now is make sure their deaths were not in vain. What do you think? Could these murders have been prevented? What needs to change to protect victims of domestic violence? Let us know in the comments. And if you or someone you know is in a dangerous situation, please Reach out for help. Thank you for joining us on this episode of True Crime Revealed. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll see you next time. Imagine this. You're fast asleep in bed next to the person you love. The home is silent, the world outside still. But then, in the dead of night, everything changes. At 3:30 a.m. on February 21st, 2008 in Minden, Nevada, a horrifying crime takes place. Ben Oxley, a devoted father, is found murdered, shot at point-blank range in his own bed. His wife, Melissa Oxley, wakes up to a nightmare. She's covered in blood. Her husband is dead beside her. But what's even more terrifying? She has no idea what happened. The police arrive, and there's only one explanation that makes sense to them. Melissa did it. She was right there. She was unharmed. She had to be the killer. But they're wrong. What they don't know is that someone else was awake that night. Someone small, someone innocent. A 6-year-old girl, and what she saw would change everything. Before tragedy struck, Ben Oxley's life was centered around one thing: his daughter, Alyssa. Living in the quiet town of Minden, Nevada, Ben was a devoted single father, doing everything he could to rebuild his life after a difficult divorce from Dawn Oxley. Though the separation was messy, one thing remained clear: Alyssa was his world. At first, Ben shared custody, splitting time with his ex-wife. But whenever Alyssa was with him, he made sure their time together was unforgettable. One of their most cherished moments was a Valentine's Day father-daughter dance. As the song Butterfly Kisses played, Ben held his little girl close, twirling her around the dance floor, promising to always be there for her. But Ben wasn't just a father, he was also a man looking for love. That's when he met Melissa. From the moment they connected, sparks flew. Their relationship blossomed quickly, but Ben knew that if Melissa was going to be a part of his life, she also had to be a part of Alyssa's. So on their very first date, Ben brought Alyssa along.
Our first date, Alyssa was there. Alyssa's like, "Don't talk to my dad."
I remember meeting her. I didn't really like her.
At first, Alyssa wasn't thrilled about sharing her father's love with someone new, but Melissa didn't push. Instead, she patiently built a relationship with the little girl, one rooted in care, understanding, and time. By September 17, 2006, Ben and Melissa stood at the altar, ready to start their new life together. But their wedding day wasn't just about them, it was about Alyssa too. In a heartwarming moment, Melissa bent down and fastened a delicate bracelet around Alyssa's tiny wrist. Engraved on it was a promise that she would always love her as her own daughter. From that day forward, they weren't just a couple, they were a family. Shortly after their marriage, Ben and Melissa were granted full custody of Alyssa, removing Dawn from her life entirely. Their home now included Melissa's younger brother, Craig, a teenager living with them at the time. For the first time in years, Ben, Melissa, and Alyssa had the life they had always dreamed of. They had no idea that in just 2 years, it would all come crashing down. For all appearances, the Oxley household was happy. A loving father, a devoted stepmother, and a bright young girl who finally had the stability she needed. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. No one inside that house could have predicted that in the early hours of February 21st, 2008, their lives would change forever. At exactly 3:30 a.m., a frantic 911 call was placed from the Oxley home. Melissa Oxley's voice trembled as she spoke.
911, address of your emergency.
I was sleeping. I turned on the light to wake up my husband, and it's really, really bad.
She had been sleeping beside Ben, but now she was drenched in his blood. Her husband was motionless, his head blown apart by a shotgun blast. And yet, she had heard nothing. When police arrived, the house was eerily silent, as if time had stopped. Then they noticed something chilling. The front door was wide open. Slowly they moved through the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. In the hallway stood Melissa, frozen in shock, clutching a terrified 6-year-old Alyssa in her arms. A few doors down, her teenage brother Craig lay asleep in his bed, seemingly unaware of the horror unfolding just a few feet away. The Oxley home had become a crime scene. Ben was gone, executed in his sleep. Melissa stood motionless, her hands and clothes soaked in his blood. And Alyssa, only 6 years old, clung to her stepmother, trembling. The air was thick with tension. Officers scanned the house, but something about the scene didn't add up. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, no missing valuables. Whoever had done this hadn't needed to break in. Police didn't have to look far for their first suspects. Melissa under suspicion. At the station, Melissa Oxley sat across from detectives, still in shock. Her hands trembled as she wiped at dried blood on her arms. Her husband was murdered while lying right next to her, and yet she was completely unharmed.
Why somebody shoots him, might not see anything.
I don't know. I don't know.
Sometimes people know more than they want to tell or share. And I really need it all.
No.
It's the worst feeling thinking that you're getting blamed for your husband's death.
It didn't make sense. How could someone sleep through a shotgun blast fired just inches away? Melissa wasn't just a witness anymore. She was their prime suspect, Craig's suspicious bedroom discovery. But there was someone else in the house that night. 17-year-old Craig, Melissa's younger brother, had been asleep in his room just down the hall. At first, police didn't think much of it until they searched his bedroom. On Craig's nightstand, they found 2 shotgun shells. And Craig wasn't just any teenager, he was a hunter. He knew how to use a firearm. He had access to a shotgun. And Ben Oxley had been killed with a shotgun. Now, Craig wasn't just a bystander, he was a suspect.
I was pretty tired last night. I was in a pretty deep sleep. Even when I got there, I didn't even know what was going on, really.
So you didn't hear anything?
No, my doors were shut.
Did you kill Ben?
I did not.
The detectives weren't convinced until they tested his hands for gunpowder residue. The results came back negative. Craig hadn't fired a weapon that night. And just like that, the investigation hit a wall, Alyssa's heartbreaking pleas. While police tried to figure out who had pulled the trigger, little Alyssa sat alone in another room. Her face was pale, her small hands gripping the edge of her chair. She didn't understand why people kept asking questions. She didn't understand why they wouldn't let her see her father. She just wanted to go home. "I want to see Daddy." Melissa gently shook her head, holding her close. "You can't, sweetheart." Alyssa didn't know the truth yet. She didn't know that her father was never coming home. And no one knew yet that she was the only person in that house who had seen something that night. Something that would change everything. For weeks, the investigation felt stuck. There were no weapons, no fingerprints, no clear evidence pointing to a killer. Police had their suspicions, but without proof, Melissa and Craig walked free. Still, the town wasn't convinced. Rumors spread like wildfire. Melissa did it for the insurance money. Craig did it in a fit of rage. Someone inside the house had to be guilty. But then, everything changed. But then, detectives returned to the only person who might have seen something that night, Alyssa. At just 6 years old, she had lost the only father she had ever known. She had been kept away from the crime scene, shielded from the full horror of what had happened in that bedroom. But there was one thing no one had asked her yet. Had she been awake? At first, Alyssa hesitated. She was just a child. Her world had been shattered overnight. But as she sat with investigators, her small voice finally broke the silence. "I wasn't asleep that night." The detective leaned in. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Alyssa's little hands gripped the edge of her chair. She swallowed hard, then spoke the words that would change everything. "I saw someone come in." Alyssa had woken up in the middle of the night. Something had startled her. The house had been so quiet, but then a noise. She remembered hearing a soft creak, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. And when she peeked out from her bed, she saw it, a shadowy figure moving through the house. "Did you see their face?" She shook her head. "No, they were in the dark, but they stopped. They looked at me." A dark silhouette, standing still, watching her. Then, as quietly as they had entered, they turned away, disappearing into the hallway. Minutes later, her father was dead. The detectives exchanged glances. Melissa and Craig had both been inside the house that night. Neither of them had gone in or out of that door, which meant only one thing. The killer wasn't in the house already. They had come from outside, and that meant they could have left without a trace. For the first time since the investigation had begun, police had a new lead. The killer wasn't Melissa. The killer wasn't Craig. The killer had been watching, waiting, moving in the darkness. And now they had a name in mind. As detectives expanded their search, they uncovered a new detail that set the town ablaze. Ben Oxley had a $400,000 life insurance policy. And Melissa? She was the sole beneficiary. The whispers grew louder. She killed him for the money. She knew exactly what she was doing. She played the grieving widow perfectly. But there was one problem. Melissa had no idea the policy existed. If she didn't know about the money, then what was the motive? With no arrests made, the court ruled that Alyssa would be placed back into the custody of her biological mother, Dawn Oxley. Just like that, Melissa lost the daughter she had promised to love forever. Alyssa was sent to live with Dawn and her boyfriend, James Matleen. It should have been a homecoming, but it didn't feel like one. Despite the whispers, the accusations, the world telling her otherwise, Alyssa never doubted Melissa's innocence. She knew what real love felt like, and what she was about to experience in her mother's home was anything but. As Alyssa re-entered her mother's world, police dug into Dawn's past. What they found wasn't the life of a loving, grieving mother. It was a history of neglect, crime, and addiction. Dawn Oxley had been in and out of jail for drug possession, for DUI, for domestic violence. She had lost custody of Alyssa years earlier because of her unstable lifestyle, and she had never forgiven Ben for it. To her, he had stolen her child, and he had made her pay child support for a daughter she could no longer see. It was a deep, burning resentment, one that festered for years. And now that Ben was dead, Alyssa was back in her life. Was that a coincidence, or was it something much darker? Dawn had gotten exactly what she wanted after Ben's death. Alyssa back in her custody, but detectives weren't convinced this was just a tragic coincidence. She had years of resentment toward Ben. He had taken full custody of Alyssa. He had won in court, forcing Dawn to pay child support. He had moved on, remarried, and built a happy family without her. Was his murder the final act of revenge? To rattle her, police launched open surveillance. Dawn and her boyfriend, James Matleen, were suddenly being watched everywhere they went. Marked police cars tailed them through town. Officers stood outside their house, making their presence known. It wasn't just about gathering evidence, it was psychological pressure. And it worked. James Matleen had claimed that on the night of the murder, he was home with Dawn the entire time. But when investigators dug deeper, they found a crack in his alibi. Security footage from a convenience store early that morning. James was there, not at home. His story began to unravel.
What do you think I lied to you about?
In that first interview, when I originally asked you if you had gone out of the house that night, you told me no.
Okay.
You made up a big story about how you guys watched movies all night long, how you passed out on the couch, how you, et cetera, et cetera. You went on about that. Later, I found out through surveillance video that you were at 7-Eleven.
One day, Dawn's teenage son, Devin, walked into the police station. His face was pale, his hands shaking. I need to tell you something. For years, he had been caught in the middle of his mother's hatred toward Ben. He had heard her rant about him endlessly. He ruined my life. I shouldn't have to pay him a dime. I should just make him disappear. At the time, Devin hadn't thought much of it, but now he realized his mother had meant every word. And Ben's murder wasn't random. It was planned. With Dawn's own son testifying against her, police turned up the heat on James. He was the weak link, and under hours of relentless questioning, he finally broke. His confession was as chilling as it was revealing. Dawn was the mastermind. She planned everything. She convinced James to pull the trigger. She waited in the car, ready for a quick getaway. It had been a cold, calculated execution. And yet, it was almost worse than that, because James had confessed to something even more disturbing. James hadn't just killed Ben that night. He had stepped toward Melissa. He had pointed the shotgun at her. His finger hovered over the trigger. For a moment, he was ready to end her life too. But then he hesitated. Something stopped him. A flicker of doubt. A split-second decision. And instead of pulling the trigger again, he turned and ran. James's confession confirmed Alyssa's worst fear. The shadowy figure she had seen that night, the dark silhouette standing in her doorway, it had been her own mother. Dawn Oxley had stood in her daughter's bedroom moments before her father was murdered. And in that moment, Alyssa had unknowingly looked into the eyes of a killer. For 4 years, the murder of Ben Oxley remained a tangled mystery. Speculation, accusations, dead ends. But now there was no doubt. With James Matleen's confession, detectives had everything they needed. It was time for justice. The arrest on a cold January morning, police surrounded Dawn Oxley's home. As they stepped inside, Dawn barely reacted. She had spent years believing she had gotten away with it. But now, her time was up. She and James were both arrested. The woman who once swore she'd get Alyssa back no matter what was now being charged with her father's murder. And Alyssa? She was finally free. For the first time since that terrible night, she was reunited with the only person who had ever truly loved her, Melissa. After years of heartbreak, stepmother and daughter were together again. But their battle wasn't over yet. January 31st, 2012. 4 years after Ben's murder, Melissa and Alyssa sat in a courtroom, face to face with the people who had destroyed their lives. James Matleen, Ben's killer. Dawn Oxley, the woman who orchestrated it all. Melissa took the stand first. She had waited years for this moment. She turned to face the man who had stolen her husband, Alyssa's father. Her voice was steady, but every word cut like a blade.
Emotionally, the damage you have caused me is almost unbearable. For Alyssa, you crumbled her foundation and everything she knew to be right and true.
The courtroom was silent. Then Devin, Dawn's own son, stood to testify. He told the court everything. The years of neglect, the hatred she spewed toward Ben, the manipulation that had led to his death. In the audience, Alyssa watched, wide-eyed. Her mother, the woman who had brought her into this world, had taken her father out of it. But then, Dawn did something no one expected. She turned on James. To save herself, she agreed to testify against him, cutting a deal that gave her immunity from a murder charge. James, now left without options, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. His sentence? Life without parole. Ben Oxley finally had justice. But Dawn, she escaped a murder conviction. Instead, she was sentenced only for lesser charges, including parole violations, domestic battery, and DUI. She would spend years in prison, but she would eventually walk free. Justice had been served, but not completely. For Alyssa, it wasn't about revenge. It was about healing. And now, with Melissa by her side, she finally had a chance to begin again. For years, Alyssa Oxley's life had been shaped by loss, betrayal, and unthinkable tragedy. At just 6 years old, she had witnessed the aftermath of her father's murder. She had been forced to live with the very people responsible for his death. She had been told lies about the woman who truly loved her. And yet, despite it all, she never lost faith in Melissa. When the trial ended, Alyssa had a final request, something no one saw coming. She wanted to speak to James Matleen, the man who had taken her father away, the man who had almost taken Melissa too.
I told him that I decided to forgive him and that I wanted him to have hope.
At just 10 years old, Alyssa understood something that many people never do, that holding on to hate wouldn't bring her father back. Her decision wasn't about James, it was about herself. She refused to let anger define her future. Instead, she chose healing. She chose love. Melissa had once made a promise on her wedding day that she would love and care for Alyssa as her own daughter. And despite everything that had happened, she kept that promise. She and Alyssa built a new life together, but they didn't stop there, because in an act of extraordinary compassion, Melissa made another decision. She welcomed Brandy, Dawn's other daughter, into their family as well. Brandy, like Alyssa, had lost her sense of home, and Melissa wasn't going to let another child be left behind. They became a family bound not by blood, but by love. Years have passed since that tragic night in February 2008. Alyssa is no longer that little girl peeking out into the darkness. She has grown, learned, and healed. But no matter where life takes her, her father is still with her.
I miss him a lot. I think he still loves me and that I'm doing much better than I was at my other house.
She carries him in her heart, in her memories, in the family he left behind. And in the home that she and Melissa built together, Ben Oxley's love will never fade. Because love, real love, is the kind that lasts forever. The story of Ben Oxley is one of love, loss, and resilience. It's a reminder that tragedy doesn't just break people, it can also bring them together. Through unimaginable pain, Alyssa found the strength to forgive. Through relentless accusations, Melissa never gave up on the daughter she promised to love. And through it all, Ben's memory has never faded. This case is closed, but stories like this happen far too often. That's why we bring you real cases, real voices, and real justice. If you want to hear more stories of survival, justice, and the human spirit, don't forget to subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Like this video if Ben's story touched you. Comment below. What are your thoughts on Alyssa's incredible journey? Share this video to keep Ben's story alive. Because every time we remember these victims, we ensure that their voices are never silenced. This has been True Crime Revealed. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll see you in the next case.